people who help fight human trafficking. What are some tips you have for spotting illegal activity and reporting it? Not really helping fight human trafficking, but if you are watching porn and spot something you even think is child porn, you can report the website here. Holy shit, this brought back a bad image. A couple months ago I was looking for this one adult video that I liked but seemed to be removed from Pornhub, which in itself should have been a red flag. I eventually found it after a couple of minutes, but it was on one of those sketchy-ass websites where a pop-up comes up every other click you make. Well, turns out one of those pop-ups goes to a literal child porn forum, where the first thing I'm greeted with is a picture of a little girl doing something I won't even say here. I immediately reported the site and closed out faster than I ever have before. Moral of the story: avoid sketchy porn sites. This shit is way more out in the open than you'd think. This is a great tip. One of the problems of porn is that it's nearly impossible to tell who is being coerced behind the scenes and who isn't. The younger they are, the more likely coercion is. But even adults can be trafficked or coerced or otherwise trapped or taken advantage of. Plus, the rise of easy access porn is fueling a rise in sex trafficking. Great tip. Easily one of the most common ways of spotting an offender. Child pornography is a crime that you are required to report. One of the few crimes that by not reporting it, you are committing a crime as well. So I'm trying to figure out how to report a pedophile for soliciting nudes from a minor. I finally figured out a way to report them to the Reddit admins, but they have done nothing about it. I found that website you linked, but they don't have an option for solicitation. So is solicitation of child porn not illegal? Solicitation of or no I've told this story on here before. I don't fight human trafficking, but I'm a teacher who had a student who was sold by his mother in exchange for drugs. He was kept as a sex slave from ages 3-11 when the FBI uncovered a sex ring and found him. He had never been to school. He had never even been out of the house. These sorts of crimes are not being committed out in the open. They are very well hidden. You will never see these children, and no one is missing them. This poor boy couldn't read or write. One day, he got a 100 on his spelling test. He asked me if I could call his mom and ask her to take him back, and he'd be a good boy from now on. Child sex trafficking is unfortunately all too common, but it has become a very hidden problem. This is heartbreaking. As a father myself to a beautiful 4-year-old boy who is my entire world, I couldn't fucking imagine. The worst part is that he said he would be good. Dude, I fucking can't. Like, how can anyone do this? Children are innocent, full of hope, full of life, and it's fucking soul-crushing to see things like this. Jesus fucking Christ. I have a newborn boy, and reading this both enraged me and broke my heart. I wish I could give this kid a hug and a loving home. How is he doing now? Is his abuser in prison? I'm not calling that woman the word. She doesn't fucking deserve it. This is heartbreaking. My therapist once told me the story of a young boy whose mother poured gasoline on him and set him on fire. He was put in a coma for healing, and when he was brought out of the coma, he was screaming for his mommy. This story allowed me to forgive myself, or at least understand why I loved my horribly abusive mother. Honor thy mother and father should also include honor thy child. My wife used to teach piano in an affluent suburb, and one of her students had an elderly nana who was openly treated like dirt by everyone in the house. She began to suspect this was a case of trafficking slavery, but shortly after she took a moment to talk to the old lady about her situation, the family got rid of the old lady and subsequently fired my wife from teaching their kid. The family got rid of the old lady. Did they just throw her into the wood chipper or what? There was a story like this in the Atlantic a few years ago. Yikes, that's really horrible. It is good to be aware that both poor and rich people can be exploiters. What did the old lady tell her? Here in Spain, we get a lot of women from Eastern Europe and Sub-Saharan Africa. Some pay for their trip to Europe this way. Some are blackmailed, and some are lured offers of jobs like cleaning or low-level administrative job secretaries, paper pushing, and end up in a roadside brothel. If you're a young woman in a poor area of Eastern Europe and you get an offer for an easy job in Germany, France, Spain, or the Netherlands, be very suspicious. Exactly. In the East, there have been public service adverts, billboards, posters, about this for at least 25 years. I'd say most people know. But the problem is sometimes people get so desperate might have kids to feed. They trick themselves into ignoring the warning signs. Well, this German nightclub job seems legit, or convince themselves it won't happen to them. I'd add, if you do go, just never give anyone your passport. If they need a photocopy, you can make it yourself. Also, men are not immune. Men are more often trafficked for labor like construction work, but it is still very bad. Yeesh, that's really sad. Good advice. Hopefully it helps someone out there. I was working in China teaching English. One of my fellow teachers was blonde and good-looking. One day she told me excitedly she had an offer to marry a Russian man. He was going to pay her $30,000 to marry him. All she had to do was travel to Russia to meet him. We were in Kikahare, about 2,000 from Russia. I managed to talk her out of it. I think I may have saved her life. I don't think people realize how common this is, not just in Spain, not just for women from Eastern Europe and Africa. It happens constantly in Canada to Canadian citizens. If you're a woman in Canada and you get some job offer in the travel industry, or for some resort even if it is local, that you never applied to, stay clear, stay very clear. Our country, Philippines, is unfortunately the global hotspot of child cybersex trafficking in the world. Unlike what's usually portrayed in movies, these children are not kidnapped by syndicates then sold to pedophiles. Sadly, most of the sexual abuses happen at home. Parents or guardians are the ones exploiting them to get money. I am not directly involved in the actual rescue or fight, but I do work with non-profit organizations that provide shelter and therapy for rescued victims. I've met and talked to some of these children. Many of them didn't even realize that they are being abused, especially those who were not raped early. They were groomed to think that just getting nude in front of the camera or touching themselves for pedophiles is not bad. I think one important thing is that kids should know when they are being abused. It should be taught in schools. It can save lives. I'm friends with a woman that, when she was a child, her mother would charge men to come and rape her. They were always introduced to her as Uncle So-and-so. Her mother was heavily into drugs and used the money to continue the habit. Her mother is still in prison and they were no contact, obviously. She finally ran away and got in touch with authorities when she was 16. My friend has horrible panic attacks just around men in general, and especially when the word uncle is used. She's nearly 40 and single by choice, and is very reserved and introverted. On anti-anxiety and anti-depression meds and sees 2 therapists regularly. She's so creative and imaginative. It just breaks my heart that she is hurt even to this day by what was done to her. So a guy who was a convicted child sex offender did an AMA on Reddit once. And I actually went and saw his profile and his posts, and man, I was kinda shocked and just how much child sex abuse happened within his family. Apparently his uncle had sexually abused him as a kid. I'm not fully sure, but I do think his uncle sexually abused his sister as well as a kid. And his sister has also apparently sexually abused him as a kid. And when he became an adult, he sexually abused his niece, sister's daughter. And I think he got caught and jailed and stuff, but he says he is now in a good position with his parents and sister. But man, what a vicious cycle and environment that he was in. And what a vicious cycle and then wasn't iron sad Update. Sorry guys, I couldn't find the original AMA. I tried Googling for that specific and also the Amethy Shoal post as well, but I could not find it. To be honest, I kind of felt on edge Googling it due to those words I had to use to Google. I did include Reddit in all my searches, but still felt weird. If I stumble up on it later, I'll post it on here. In Latin America, look for maids who have been with a family since they were children. In my country, they are called criadas. This is form of servitude that closely resembles slavery and begins with a child usually female, of a poor rural family being brought to live with a moderately wealthy urban family. The promise of a better future than what the parents could provide. These kids don't attend school and perform house chores all day and are paid in food and living quarters and sometimes the promise of money that the bosses are holding for them. They grow up this way, so when they are adults they are afraid to leave. They don't know any other way of life. The bosses don't often acknowledge anything wrong and they claim that the criada is grateful for having been given a better life. I sadly have to admit that this happened in my extended family. They were bosses to a criada who would be 75 years old today. Only after all my aunts died and my cousins inherited the criada, they acknowledged the wrongdoing and arranged for her to have a pension and a house and never have to work again and be treated a respected member of the family. But it was too late. She only lived as a retired person for 5 years before dying. She only lived as a She never learned to read. She never had children or a husband or any type or significant other. I actually have a story for this. I am by no means someone who exposes sex trafficking for a living, just someone who had an experience. I lived in a very sketch apartment complex in Phoenix. My wife and I generally keep to ourselves, so we didn't really have a problem. We at first noticed that there were constant visitors to our immediate neighbors. Their front door faced our front door. We figured maybe they were selling weed or some shit like that. We don't give a flying fuck, as long as you don't bring trouble to us. Then we noticed it was only men who would show up every 15-20 minutes, stay for 15-45 minutes and leave. At this point we were thinking whatever. If a chick wants to use sex work, we can't give a shit. Then we noticed the pimp and the other girls in this apartment. They looked young, never left the apartment unless escorted, and would only stick around for a couple of months before a new girl was brought in. When I say young, I mean they looked maybe 18. We only started realizing during quarantine and were home all day. The men would constantly knock on our door throughout the day and night, which is what caught our attention. Anyways, we called Phoenix. They knocked on the door and said they couldn't do anything without us providing photographic evidence. So we sat on our patio one day and discreetly starting taking photos of all the men coming in. Call the cops again and provide evidence. They knock on the door again. A customer walks out and hauls us. The girls all haul us. The pimp comes by after and bangs on our door. We stayed at my dad's house for 2 weeks while a sex crimes investigator surveyed the apartment. The pimp helped them move out and the investigator was able to find their new spot. We moved the fuck out very shortly after because we were afraid of some sort of revenge. This is long, but pay attention to the people surrounding where you live. No need to be a nosy person, but when we actually started paying attention, we saw what was going on more clearly. We were concerned because none of these girls spoke any English, weren't allowed out of the complex without an escort, and seemed to be replaced constantly. You are awesome and thank you for going the extra mile. I hope they were able to help those girls out. Damn good for you for actually reporting and following through with it too. I worked as front desk for a hotel. Had a couple of experiences with this. Look for groups of 2-3 where one person does all of the talking, specifically when the others look scared or overly covered, cringe when the talker is speaking, or look under the influence of something. Ensure you get aid from all parties when you suspect something is going on. Note down their room number and names given. Trust your gut. What we call a gut feeling is a combination of millions of tiny factors you might not knowingly be aware of. Tiny details like hitched breathing, micro-expressions, specific lying tells, environmental factors, etc. These all add up and let your subconscious mind make connections that your general mind might not. Trust that feeling if you suspect something is wrong, and contact the police to inform them of a suspected human trafficking issue. Both times my gut told me to call it and I ended up regrettably being correct. These specific details are great. Thank you. I'm shook. I saw an odd group of 3 at an airport once. Come back from Jamaica. One was small, timid, fragile, and looked vastly different than the other 2, who were rugged and were talking to each other constantly. The timid one just tagged along and never looked at them or talked to them. I should have reported them. A border security even stopped my fiance and I and asked us a bunch of questions, one being if we saw anyone suspicious. My gut was telling me that trio did not look right, and according to the points you made, the two were trafficking the young girl. Fuck. Thank you for calling it in. Most of human trafficking is not the movie kind. Is more the kind where an ethnic restaurant brings over a cook from their home country and they have to work unreasonable hours to pay back for the trip. Or maybe it is a maid or a construction worker who works below minimum wage and can't have their passport back. So look for people who work long hours at sublegal wages. There's a great story I read in which the author tells the story of Lola, who he eventually came to realize was his family's indentured servant. When his mother was a child in the Philippines, her mother died and a distant cousin named Lola came to live with her and her father to care for her in exchange for room and board. Apparently, the deal was for life. Lola stayed with his mother through adulthood, after marriage, and then came to the United States with the family. Eventually, long staying past the legal lengths of her stay, she was kept hidden away, cooking, cleaning, and caring for the kids, with no pay. She faced daily verbal abuse from his parents and didn't gain any type of freedom until the mother died and Lola moved in with the author and his family. I think situations like that happen far more often than people realize. To add to this, the same applies for human trafficking for sexual purposes. The person being trafficked is rarely some innocent kidnapping victim and more so someone in desperate situation who entered sex work as a last resort. Their trafficker is usually their pimp. If you want a really good breakdown of what human trafficking actually looks like, I suggest looking into the podcast You Were Wrong About. They have a really good episode on the topic. Indentured servitude, that's what it was called back in the day. In the early years of the colonization of the Americas, and continuing until the early to mid-1800s, unsure of date of the newly formed United States, individuals who could not afford to travel from Europe would have the costs covered by people already established in the New World in exchange for work. It is illegal and it is awful that it still happens. There's an app you can download called Trafficum. Anytime you stay at a hotel, upload photos of your room. Those photos are incorporated into an artificial intelligence algorithm that helps identify locations of trafficking victims via background details. One thing to note is sometimes it can happen in your own backyard. It can be the people you least expect. I remember as a kid, maybe age 10 or 11, I used to play at one of my neighbor's house down the street. The girl who lived there was 2 years younger than me, so around 7 or 8. And I knew that her family was poorer than ours cause the house was smaller and sorta in shambles and very dirty. I played there all the time, and she would always say things that were odd or sexual, and it would always make me uncomfortable. My gut told me something was wrong. One day she casually dropped that her brother had molested her and that his friends paid to use her body as well. I remember not being able to really process the weight of what she told me, but I knew it was wrong, and I ended up telling my mom, and my mom called the family. Not sure what ended up happening to her because my family moved neighborhoods, but it still really creeps me out to this day, knowing I had sleepovers at her house when her brother and his friends were over, and I could have just as easily been taken advantage of. This type of thing is not uncommon at all. Whoa, that's really awful. Even more awful how common it is. I'm coming in over 1,000 comments deep, but I had a loved one pulled into the sex trafficking industry as an adult. So, I can offer a couple pointers for spotting adults who are being sold as prostitutes. 1. Missing shoes. It is hard to run away in a city barefoot. Blisters are a dead giveaway too. Not carrying a cell phone identification, or the purse or wallet to put it in. Their pimp likes to hold these hostage to prohibit contact with the outside world and to make it difficult to purchase long-distance transportation. I had a family member go through this. It all started with a flyer saying she could be a model. Then came phone calls that would leave her scared. One thing to know, no trafficked child looks the same. Here in the UK and across the world, children of all ages, genders, and cultures are subjected to human trafficking and exploitation. Vulnerable children, like the ones on the streets, are targeted and moved both within countries and across borders. Those trafficked here into the UK are often taken from areas of poverty and made to go on dangerous journeys, traveling thousands of miles away from home, with many being abused and exploited on the way. On arrival at their destination, the children can be coerced into cannabis cultivation, benefit fraud, and forced begging. Others are forced into sexual exploitation or domestic servitude, and the children do not realize that what's happening to them is wrong. I speak only for Ok, as I am a man from there. An increasingly high-profile form of child trafficking is county lines. This involves predominantly British children being groomed by their exploiters, who then coerce them into buying and selling drugs, often across the country. The exploiters purposefully prey on the most vulnerable children and teenagers, grooming them and gaining their trust over time, often by giving them expensive items such as designer clothes and mobile phones, before forcing them to deal drugs to pay back the debt that they have incurred. They may be too fearful to speak out, as they have become reliant on their traffickers to feed and clothe them. They may also have been subjected to physical, sexual, and emotional abuse, or do not know where to turn for help. Children who have been trafficked from outside of the UK often speak little or no English, making them even more isolated and dependent on those exploiting them. An almost perfect scheme. There you go. That is very interesting and, of course, extremely sad. What sort of measures are being taken in the UK to deal with this? So you know. I really hope this doesn't get buried. The manicure industry is notorious for this. So please think twice before patronizing salons you aren't familiar with. This article is so insightful. Quick summary: when prices are low, they were usually not paying workers. Often nail salon working immigrants must pay a training fee of $100 to start working and won't get paid for the first month or more. Finally, when bosses decide they are trained, they get paid usually less than $3 per hour on a 66-hour work week. In addition, bosses are often abusive and racist, making it difficult for anyone in the worker's situation to get out. Yes, I'm a lawyer in NEC, and I do a lot of pro bono work with survivors of sex and labor trafficking. The majority of my clients were trafficked through nail salons and massage parlors. Were trafficked through My husband works with a children's home that deals with human trafficking. As said above, most have to do with horrible work conditions, but there are some that are actual sex trafficking, and he said that he finds most of the victims very quiet, and their eyes are always darting, constantly looking around for the next horrible thing to happen. He comes home and cries and tells me this job is the most rewarding he's ever done, but it is going to break his heart and his hope for humanity. Please tell your husband thanks for what he does. From an anonymous Redditor. That must be such a difficult job. I can't even imagine. Not what you were exactly looking for, but just sharing something rather common that happens to many migrant workers here. The bulk of the foreign construction labor here are from countries like India, Bangladesh, and these people are usually arranged to come here with a work permit through the help of an agent. My family runs a business that is rather reliant on such labor, and many times we have encountered cases of workers being duped into coming here. The usual process for hiring on our side is to go through a local agency here. These agencies have contacts with other agents in those countries who will then arrange the paperwork and recruitment. So on our end, we will be referred those workers, and if we hire them, we pay the agency a fee as well. Aside from these agents in their home countries charging exorbitant fees to the workers to arrange for a job here about tanks their monthly salary here, a number of them paint a false picture of prospective work here, enticing them to come over with offers of office jobs and false salaries. When they come here and realize they are going to do construction work at far lower salaries, they are trapped because they and their families usually loan hefty amounts to pay the upfront fees to these agents. While this is becoming less common, a frequent scenario we see is the agent falsely advertising skills that the worker does not have. We needed someone with specific engineering technical skills, and there was no way we could do any on-job training for this new hire. The moment he is let go or rejected, he has a limited time to find a new job before he has to leave and find a way to pay off his agent fees loans. Is it human trafficking? Strictly speaking, no. Is it illegal? Strictly speaking, no as well. But it does fuck up the lives of migrant workers unfortunate enough to end up with such agents. Edit. The demographics here are vastly differently from other countries in the sense that laborers are entirely from overseas. I would say 10 of them are being exploited in one way or another here. The agents decent or scumbag continue to thrive because of the middleman gap. Nobody will hire directly by setting up resources in these countries, and the paperwork involved is tedious. Check out Deliver Fund if you want to do something about it or read about how they fight it. I am just a supporter of theirs, so I can't answer your question directly. They have some videos that might give you a better idea of how it happens though. The Covenant House in NOLA takes in kids who are subject to this and at times subjected for years. Then full player Ben Watson was involved in helping rescue kids. He did a very moving piece about the plight of some of these involuntary situations. He made some of the zillies about the involuntary might want to look up the story. I was dumbfounded at the extent and the effort adults will exert to exploit these poor kids. The story still haunts me, and I watched it years ago. Yeah, I think I have heard of that. I have great admiration for those who help on the front lines, help to end trafficking. Football games, especially the Super Bowl events in the US. Pimps and traffickers will bring in girls from Olioff game or the Super Bowl. I'm sure the same is true for other reports saved. My wife is an attorney who works on the advocacy side of human sexual exploitation, and in overhearing her meetings, the one line that struck me the most, and that I had never thought of previously, is, "There's no such thing as an 11-year-old prostitute." The idea being, when you're 11, you're a victim, not a criminal. So to answer your question, the best way to spot it is to contextualize illegal activity, in this case sexual, and realize when someone is doing something because they were being forced by someone. This is really good advice to help change mental paradigms. Where I live, human trafficking is a big problem, and there was a huge bust at a hotel not too long ago. Usually hotels, motels, and airlines are trained to look out for signs of trafficking. Red flags include those who are very scared or nervous around specific people or talk like they're following a script. Those who are targeted usually come from broken homes or poor countries with the promise of a better life, or how all of their problems can be solved by doing C. It can also include being showered with expensive or luxury gifts as a start of the luring in process. Van have had one odd experience. I was boarding a flight one day too with passengers, but I got to this one couple that made me feel it 15 years apart. He handed me both of their passes and kind of talking to her, and he answered me saying that she is his wife. Look at me. Looked at the screen, and they have different last, and for couples to have age gaps or not to change names. Beautying. Had a bad feeling. Called a supervisor and the porter. Not sure what ever happened with them, but the whole thing port saved.
Like and subscribe for more Reddit content. Watch the next video at the top of your screen.